As mentioned in the introduction to the Miro board, I like to start my 90-day workshop and thinking about my 90-day plan by doing an activity to get yourself in the right frame of mind. To do this, I like to spend some time just brainstorming and thinking about some of the common traps that people fall into when starting a new job and what are some of those keys to success. This not only helps put you in the right frame of mind, but it also helps you think about some of those common traps and how to avoid them. So then when you are creating your plan, you're making sure you are avoiding them, as well as what some of those keys to success are, and making sure that you are putting each of them into your plan, and your plan is focusing on those things. I encourage you to pause the video here, and before I dive into talking about what the common traps are and what the common keys to success are, to actually get a pen and paper or even take your own copy off the Miro board and actually start to brainstorm what some of those common traps might be. Think about when you've observed other people start a new role, or even yourself doing your own reflection on your own previous roles. What were some of those traps that you fell into, or what were some of those traps that those people fell into? And then thinking about those who, started a new job really well, or the times that you started a new job and you felt like that it went really well, what were some of those things that attributed to its success? What were some of those things that helped you actually start that new role really well? Or thinking about people that you've observed, what did they do differently that helped them do really well? So again, pen and paper, or even take your own copy of the Miro board and do a bit of brainstorming here before I actually explain to you what some of the ones that I've observed are, and that I've also observed in the dozens of product managers I've coached through their first 90 days and product managers I've personally onboarded as well as a product leader. Okay, what are some of the common traps to avoid? Well, the first trap that I see the most is coming in with the answer. So in the book, The First 90 Days, which I talk a lot about during this course, I have a link to it at the end. I highly encourage you getting it as well. I see they talk about this in the book, but I also see this a lot. This is probably the most common trap that people fall into. They come in, they start a new role, and they feel like they've seen it all before. Oh, I know what problem you have. This is what we need to do. Or, from a product manager's point of view, you're thinking, well, this is what we need to prioritize. This is what we need to focus on. What they neglect when they do this is understanding that different roles and different companies are all different. There's a context here. The organization's different, the team's different, the capabilities are different. As much as the product might be the same, like it might still be in health tech, it's likely still different again. The other thing that having the answer does is it also puts people offside. You come in like a know-it-all. I've seen this, I know exactly what to do. And you haven't actually invested and spent the time building rapport and trying to understand the context. People will dismiss you straight away when you come in with the answer. They'll think, oh, who's this person? This new person coming in and telling us what to do. Like we haven't tried that, or we don't know what we're doing. It definitely erodes trust, a big trap to avoid. This also ties into thinking that your past success or what you've done in previous roles is going to help you be successful here. Again, every role is different, every organization is different, every product is different, every team is different. And thinking that past success is going to attribute to your future success is a great way to have your blinders on, have tunnel vision, and to neglect and miss all those important contexts and those things that are going to help you be successful. You end up being naive and ignorant instead. So definitely a very, very common one and a big one to avoid. The next one to avoid is taking action too early. In the book, The First 90 Days, he calls this the action imperative. But I just like to think of it as taking action too early. We tend to start new roles and we have this desire or this impulse that we need to be doing things. We need to be seen doing things. So very quickly we try to take action. But the problem with taking action too early is we are neglecting that context. We haven't spent time learning. And this comes back to what I said at the beginning about trying to think about approaching a new role like you would approach a product. What do we not do with products? We don't just blindly go and build stuff. We do discovery. We spend time doing research, understanding the context, understanding our users. We want to do the same thing here. We want to spend time understanding the team, understanding the organizational goals, what what successes have happened in the past, what's the product health like before we take action. Now, this one often feels counterintuitive because we always feel like we need to take action. Like all the eyes are on us and they want us, we need to be seen doing something. The thing that you need to do here, and I'll get into it with the keys to success, is there's a balance. There's a balance between taking action too early when you don't have that learning and that context, and taking action too late where you've been seen to not do anything. The reason why I break the 90 days down into 3 30-day sprints is because I tend to find 2 to 4 weeks or that first month, anywhere between 14 days in the first month, tends to be that sweet spot between being able to learn versus take action. So you generally can get away with not taking action in the first 2 to 4 weeks. Very few places and very few roles would see you ill in any way for doing that. In fact, a lot of places would encourage you to do that. They'll be like, hey, you're new to the role. And you can even say that, I'm new here. I still trying to learn and understand the context before I want to actually start to do anything like big or meaningful. And people tend to respect you for that. And they tend to understand, like they know what it's like to be in a new role. But when you start to go beyond the 30 days, that's when you start to get into that too late. You know, you're taking too long to do something. So that's one of the reasons why I break the sprint that way. And we'll get into that deeper when we get into keys to success and planning out your first 30 and 60 days. This also doesn't mean that you're not doing anything. You're doing a lot of learning in this time. So there's a difference between learning in regards to action and actually going and trying to solve the world without understanding the context and doing it in the right way. So try not to take action too early. Focus on learning for the first 2 to 4 weeks, and then you should be okay to avoid this trap. But it will feel counterintuitive. You'll feel like you want to. My advice is to hold out and see and focus on using those 2 to 4 weeks to just focus on learning before actually doing and taking action. And we'll get into that deeper in the next sections. The next one to avoid is misalignment on expectations. This is something I observe frequently with people starting new roles. They don't spend enough time creating alignment around their expectations, and either the expectations are misaligned or it's like too high of an expectation or unrealistic expectations. And as a result, we end up not being set up for success in our first 90 days. So a key thing here is to be able to have communication. We'll talk about in the keys to success and those conversations to have over your 90 days, and to make sure that you're setting the right expectations. Because if your expectations are misaligned, it doesn't matter how great you do in the first 90 days. You might do all this great and important work, and it might, be some of the best work you've ever done, but the expectations aren't aligned. So then you end up failing those 90 days regardless of how good you actually execute all the things that you actually achieve there. So really important to be having regular communication and to be able to set realistic and the right expectations. Now, the next common trap is forgetting to build relationships. Now, you're not going to build relationships in the first 90 days even. You're going to build some. And this is why I have the term foundation here. What you need to do is make sure you have the right foundation in order to have a stepping stone to build a very strong relationship off the back of it. People neglect this. They spend, 30, 60, even 90 days before they've actually established any strong relationships with anyone or even the foundation of relationships. I've coached product managers all the time and talked to them during the 90 days and asked them questions like, well, do you have a stakeholder map? Do you have a plan on how you're going to build relationships with your manager, the team, the key stakeholders? And often they're 30, 60 days into their 90 days and they haven't even done anything like that. They haven't set up regular one-on-ones or those types of things. We'll get into all of that a bit later when we start to dive into each of those sprints. But a very key thing, a common trap, we forget relationships, which kind of leads into the expectations, and we kind of fail in our 90 days because we haven't actually built those relationships to make ourselves successful. The next common trap is a lack of communication. Going back to that misalignment around expectations and even the relationship side, often we don't communicate enough. We get very heads down with learning about the product, learning about the team and all those types of things. And we forget to communicate what we've learned. We forget to communicate what we're observing, what we're thinking, what our expectations are, what we hope to have as a career trajectory, all those types of things. So really important that we're having regular communication. and with the key people and the right people. And we'll talk about how to structure that and how to make sure we're doing that in a very effective manner. The second last trap is about being realistic. We've got to be realistic on ourselves, right? So we've got to be able to be realistic on what we can actually achieve in the 90 days. A common trap I observe all the time is wanting to be seen like we're doing a really good job. And this comes back to that wanting to take action, but it goes even deeper than that. We start to work really long hours because we're trying to do everything. We're trying to say yes to everyone. We don't want to say no to anybody. And what we end up doing is we end up working really long hours, working at over 100% capacity, and we're not being realistic with ourselves, with the team, and our stakeholders and our manager. And what that ends up doing in the long term after your first 90 days is that it becomes very hard to claw that back. The expectation is now set. They're used to you saying yes to everything. They're used to you working those long hours and getting all this work done. And yes, they look at you in a positive light, like, oh, wow, that person's great. Look at him. I'm so glad we hired them to doing a great job. But that ends up not setting you up for success in the long term. You end up burning yourself out, and it's very hard to kind of claw that back. So it's very important to be realistic up front. Be realistic about your capacity, what you can do. Be willing to say no to things. Focus on that learning, and we'll get into all of that as we start to structure our first 30, 60, and 90 days. The last common trap is all about forgetting to do discovery. We often neglect it. We forget to spend time learning. We jump straight into action. We start doing. What we need to do is approach our new job like a product. Do discovery first. Use that discovery to inform your next 60 days, your next 30 days, your sprint, your next 30 days after that, leading up to the 90 days. Use it as data to inform your plans. What are you going to do? What are those early wins you're going to do? Who are you going to build relationships with? Who do you need to build relationships with? And equally, make sure that you're focusing on the right type of learning. We often spend a lot of time doing learning around the product, a technical learning, the team, the goals, the product health, what's our roadmap look like, all of those types of things. And what we forget to spend time learning about is the cultural things, the political things, the relationship side. How does the work get done in the organization? Who knows who? Who's the right person to ask about these problems? Who do I need to build a strong relationship with if I want to be influential in our go-to-market plans? Those types of things. So make sure that you're not just doing discovery around the technical side, the product, the health, the team, the organization. Also spend time doing those more cultural side and human side. Because remember, our role as product people is to be able to influence without authority. So very important that we're spending time on that political aspect, that relationship aspect, and not just on the technical learning. So that's it. They are the 7 common traps that I observed the most with product people starting new jobs. First one is coming in with the answer. So try to avoid that. Past success does not mean a new success. Remember, it's a new organization, a new team, a new product. Lean into it with curiosity. Go into it with all your assumptions, but treat them like assumptions. You can be wrong with all of them. Remember not to take action too early. Spend at least the first 2 to 4 weeks, and we'll get into this deeper when we start to structure our first sprint, and focus all on learning. Try to use that time and avoid taking any action in that time. Remember, try to say no, push back and say, hey, I still want to learn. I want to spend some time understanding this, and we'll get into how to structure that as well. Remember to set the right expectations. Have regular communication so we are communicating around our expectations. Focus on building the foundation for relationships. Don't neglect that part. Remember to be realistic. Don't say yes to everything. Be willing to say no. Set yourself up for success for the long term, not just in the short term. And don't forget to do discovery. Spend those 2 to 4 weeks. Again, I keep saying it, but spend those time learning, focused learning. We'll get into how to structure that in a little bit. But remember that you are learning all about the product, all about the cultural aspects, the organization, and those political aspects as well.